Okay, so I'm recording this for the folks in Boston who weren't able to make it, and Miami if they decide to go on with this as well, or any of the other cities, because this sounds like it's going to be a much bigger map than had previously anticipated. But as I was just explaining to Caitlin before I started doing the recording, DHS branches, ICE, and FEMA came to the UCC about a month ago saying that they wanted to create respite centers in select cities, mainly Dallas, Boston, New York, Miami, and Los Angeles. I don't currently have uh, any churches in Los Angeles that I think would suit this very well, but if there are any out there, happy to connect with you. Um, but what was interesting about the request is that it was not limited to those cities. I started throwing out different cities that we have a lot of immigration presence in, for example, Denver, Portland, and they said, yeah, those places too. So basically what they were asking for is they're asking to create respite centers in our churches, and I had thought that they had a plan and that they were going to provide an RFP and all that for what they wanted to do for us, like what they wanted us to do for them, us being a part of their puzzle, but that they were making the puzzle. And it turns out that's not really the case. The case is that they don't have a puzzle at all. They just had a brief idea and they asked us to make a puzzle and send it back to them. So they are asking us to create a plan for, hello, new person that joined the call. Michael, are you from one of the Miami churches?
No, Dallas.
That's Dallas.
I recognize Michael.
Okay,
Hey,
great.
Michael, thanks
Hello,
for joining us.
welcome. So as I was saying, they DHS, the branches ICE and FEMA, basically want us to create our best story for a plan on how we would create respite centers in our churches and bring it back to them. Now, I have a bunch of alarm bells going off about this because the UCC does not have the same capacity as, say, the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church would very easily be able to do this. They do this, right? They have Casalitas in Arizona. I know that the UCC partners with them, but that's primarily run by the Catholic Church. The other concern in that vein is the church having that much power within the government. I know we're UCC and we love ourselves, but at the end of the day, we are the church, and the church being given that much power over a single system is how power gets corrupted, right? So that's those are two of my major concerns. Is that first of all, we don't have the capacity to do all that for DHS, and also should we, even if we did. So my initial reaction was, okay, if you want me to create a whole plan for moving, and they said it was going to be, I said, how often, how many? And they said, well, for example, we just flew 135 migrants into Boston Logan, so maybe it would be 135. And I said, how often? They said, we don't know. It could be daily, it could be weekly, it could be monthly. And I said that they had to tell us, they had to give us a more exact number. But of course, as Craig and Francis know, they don't do that. So, and the reason why I say that is because New York City is getting buses from Governor Abbott, which I'm sure you know, Caitlin. And he didn't create a coordinated plan for that. It actually would have been a great idea if he had created a coordinated plan for that, but it was a political ploy. And so Craig and Francis are doing this amazing work, so cool, of working with a couple local nonprofits in New York City to make sure these migrants are getting the care that they need and the ability to get the final destination, which is what DHS, ICE, FEMA asked for. Craig and Francis are already doing it. So now we just have to get funding from DHS. They said that they would provide funding. They didn't tell me how much. It was all super, super vague. Another concern is I feel like they should have given me an RFP. Anyway, so it's already happening, right? And if Governor Abbott or any of the other southern border governors decide that they want to get bold and say, screw off to a government like New York or DC, then this will keep happening in other cities. I don't know what other cities, Caitlin, you might know what other cities the southern governors might do that too, but we'd like to be prepared in case they do suddenly start sending more buses without giving anyone any notice, which again would be a great idea if it was coordinated. DHS wants to coordinate it. They want to send buses. They want there to be a coordinated effort in the other half. They're just asking us to coordinate that effort, which I think is too much for the UCC to handle. So my first line of response was to bring in Church World Service, which is our best partner at the UCC. They organize a multi-denominational call about once a month. And they're organizing a call specifically on this because I slid this over to Church World Service and I said, please help. And they said that they're going to put together a call for it. I don't know why DHS came to the UCC first. I mean, it's an honor that they think so highly of our abilities, right? But we just simply don't have capacity. So I'm hoping Church World Service will give us good direction about the resources we could have, the ecumenical partnerships we could have, because we could do something like this if we had Disciples of Christ churches working together with Lutheran churches and Presbyterian churches all together, but that's not what we have right now. And if these buses are coming right now, then we have to figure out a response, which of course they are in New York. And Francis and Craig, I am concerned that it's not going to be sustainable for you, because I don't think these buses are going to stop coming anytime soon, maybe ever. This might be the new norm. And there needs to be a better response in place. And if, as you guys mentioned in the call yesterday, the mayor of New York is just using this as sort of a political weapon to spit back instead of actually providing any resources, then that's going to be problematic for us, right? Anyway, I kind of make this sound like doomsday, but it's just highly unusual what's happened, and I'm trying to be as transparent about the concerns I have about it as I can. I think it's a great idea in a lot of ways also. I brought this up on our leadership call yesterday, the UCC's leadership meeting, and all of the folks in the leadership meeting thought it was a great idea, because they do this down at the border. We have a couple shelters down at the border, and they said that's the best thing that churches can be doing. However, they're used to doing it. That's their ministry. Churches in New York City or Boston, wherever, they might have totally different missional goals, and then suddenly getting hit with hundreds of migrants every day could potentially destroy a church. So that's another concern I have, although, I agree with our leadership team as the Minister for Refugee and Migration Services with UCC National. I think this is a function of the church, and it should be, just with better support than what we're being offered. So basically, we're not being offered anything, but we could be if we put together a plan. Should we put together a plan? Our leadership team says absolutely yes, and that they will provide guidance on how to do so because they do it. But there's all these problems to keep in mind about this that I have mentioned. And that is about as much as I know. And all of this will definitely change and become more dire if Title 42 ends up getting repealed, which it could. Which we'd celebrate. It's not a constitutional law. It also could be codified. They're arguing about that right now, so we'll just see what happens. But if it does get overturned, then these buses could come any day now. So I don't have any advice, because I feel like this is, as the UCC, this should be an autonomous church effort, except that we can provide grants to churches that are doing this. Francis and Craig, I sent you guys the grant information this morning. I strongly encourage you to apply for it. So if you do decide to take this on, please take advantage of our grant processes to make sure that you have enough funding at least. But in terms of volunteer space, and also things that could go wrong, there's so many things that could go wrong, like migrants having criminal behaviors for one, or even worse, medical concerns. You guys said that there was a couple severe medical concerns that happened over the week in New York, or just not having a place to go, trauma. There's so many things to keep in mind that, anyway, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here. So yeah, go ahead, Caitlin.
At least in the respite center in McAllen, many, I mean, right now, the people that they are letting through are in dire straits, either, medical conditions that are severe, or a lot of pregnant women. And so that's another thing. Like, you might have a woman delivering a baby right in your respite center, in your shelter. And in McAllen, the way they handle all of the pregnant women is like they have a relationship with a hospital nearby, and this young girl will go and deliver, and then the hospital just kicks them right back to the respite center. And the girl could have had a cesarean section, and they're just dropped off at the respite center with baby in arms, completely fresh out of surgery. It's not, it is a very challenging situation. And that respite center, run by Catholic Charities, they have all of the support of Catholic Charities, the resettlement agency. So that's another piece of this, is that if churches took this on, they would have to build out those partnerships with the resettlement agencies that have the social work, support, that have all of the other social supports, I should say, whether it's, caseworkers for the trauma, or caseworkers to help them find shelter, a job, on and on and on. Like, it's not just, yeah, I think the reason that the respite centers work for Catholic Charities is because they're tied into this bigger network. So you're absolutely right in reaching out to Church World Service, because they're, one of the resettlement agencies that have a huge network of, they're a huge network, and they serve asylum seekers. So not all the resettlement agencies will even touch asylum seekers.
Right.
And so that's another piece of this, is like, you have to build out the partnerships with the agencies who will serve undocumented people. And a lot of agencies don't. That's just not in their, it's not within their mission or funding streams. A lot of times it's their funding streams, they're funded by federal grants. And then the other piece of this, this makes me think back to working with the displacement initiative at Boston University. They would say, be very, very careful. I mean, I don't want to speak for them, but having worked with them, I think that they would really caution us to be super careful about being the foot soldiers of these government agencies that are really messing, things up for, I mean, not only do we have really bad border policies that are creating these situations, the government agencies that are overseeing it, DHS down to FEMA and ICE, I mean, they're handling it horribly. And if the church becomes an arm of that, that's not good either. So we want to help, but is our helping actually, aiding what they're doing very badly.
Right. That was one of my major concerns, is should the church be enabling the government to make bad decisions? So,
Right. Right.
but
Right.
the person that brought this to us, I think the reason why they brought it to the UCC, knew a lot of our UCC leadership, and they trusted him. So, I mean, that says a lot, that the person in contact is a trusted connection to a lot of our leadership folks. And based on that feedback, I don't think that he's doing something that's nefarious, maybe, but,
Right. Well, and it is the mission of the church, right? This is the heart of the gospel, to give the cup of cold water, the shelter, the clothing. This is the gospel. But how do we do it in a way that is, is really thoughtful and ethical, when we're working with government systems that have really, really screwed up our migration pathways? Because I could see it being something that if Title 42 is lifted, they just start dumping people in Chicago and just whatever major city, wherever the major bus routes are, and they just funnel people to these different places. And then what are they left to? Like the mercy of whatever structures are in that city. But unless there's a real coordinated effort between the social service agencies and the and city, that's the other thing. Like you get into all of these city politics too, and they even deal with this all the time at the border. There's deep friction with the city's emergency response programs and the nonprofits that are serving the asylum seekers at the bus stops, or getting them to the shelter. There's conflict there all the time, and it's not easy on the churches on the border either. There's the reason the Catholic Charities Respite Center was set up in where it is because a church basically like split and fell apart over serving the asylum seekers, because it was just hundreds daily, and they were spilling out of the space that they had, and it overwhelmed the congregation. And then the city also, like the neighborhood, got upset where they were serving the asylum seekers, and so they basically like tucked them away in this very hidden place so that they'd be out of sight, out of mind kind of thing. So it can create, there's a lot of friction it creates. And I think we have to be aware of all of these issues, going into a church's response to potentially opening its doors to being a respite center. Having said all of that, and Michael, you may know more than I do, I know that the Oak Lawn Church in Dallas is acting as one of the respite centers right now. Like they're the church in Dallas that has been serving asylum seekers over the last few years, not just recently, but they've been doing this for a while. And I'm really curious as to how they're coordinating it, how they're getting the support they need. And I know that Reverend Neal, is working with Faith Forward Dallas, and they know that this is coming too. So they've been informed that we're probably going to see more asylum seekers in Dallas. And then how are the churches going to respond to it? But you probably know more than I do.
This brings up this time last year, it actually happened again, where we got called about busloads of immigrants coming from the border, and many even needing just a place to stop because basically government just putting them on a bus to get them out of the border. And so they would get here to Dallas. And I was surprised because there were many people who were panicked this last year, right? We worked with a trans-Latina immigrant organization in Houston, and they had some folks who were in ICE custody, but they were released and they were put on one of the buses. And so they were contacting us of, okay, we've got this bus coming to Dallas. How can you grab them, right? Can you pick them up so we can send a van of our folks to give them a ride down to Houston where they can have shelter. But one of the things I found last year was everything was very organized here in Dallas. Dallas already has a welcoming communities and immigrant affairs officer. And so the government had already coordinated with the City of Dallas office, and Faith Forward Dallas was the primary organization then that would then coordinate, right, all the buses that were coming into the City of Dallas. And Faith Forward Dallas decided, and a community of churches, that since Oak Lawn Methodist Church is already doing this work, let's actually use them. And basically we can create other support systems, right? Catholic Charities came in and did things like buying bus passes. Other organizations came in and provided meals. I mean, so there was a whole system of volunteer services that were ready. And for us, it was, okay, there were a lot of folks who were freaked out about it in other places, and things in Dallas were very well coordinated. I think that's probably the question I have is, if the government is now coming to UCC about this, where does that leave the city of Dallas, who is used to filtering all the information coming from Department of Homeland Security? I just don't want to be part of something that's going to create more confusion than anything else, especially I imagine most cities don't have a welcoming communities and immigrant affairs officer. And we do, and they've been very helpful with some local organizations. And so anything we do, I just want to be sure we're not creating something on top of something that is already there.
Right, good point. So I'm hearing two things. That the very first thing that needs to happen is each one of these cities that is being targeted for this needs to find its appropriate partnerships, both in the local governments and also in local nonprofits. And the second thing is to make sure that the local governments don't already have a system in place prepared for this. Um, do you guys in New York have any feedback about your experience with that based on this week?
I just know there is tremendous friction in terms of getting support from the city. There seems to be a battle going on, and I was just reading something that's been proposed by our local U.S. congressman, which is that there be a clear presentation and a clear responsibility given to the social services within the city, as opposed to channeling all these individuals into the homeless shelter complex. So yeah, that's one thing I know about, or one thing I've heard about. Craig, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, I think there's several things we need to consider. New York City's health system gives anyone health care if they show up at the door at a hospital. So if we've got somebody that comes to the city, like we had that one young lady last Friday who hadn't had her insulin for 4 days, which is criminal. They took her immediately and her mother immediately to a hospital system. We had another woman and child that had lesions all over their mouths, and nobody kind of knows what that was, but they went immediately there. We do have an immigration officer within the city. I think they're caught flat-footed like by this as well as the rest of us. I think there are growing pains in sort of learning to work with each other. And, you know, they came in with a publicity stunt sort of thing on the Sunday bus arrival, which was more problems than help. And you have people like, I don't know exactly who was interviewing, but press was interviewing people and sort of tricking them into answering, why are you here? Oh, to get a job. Oh, to see the Statue of Liberty. You know, there's all kinds of stuff that happens with that. So I think there are a lot of kinks to work out, and it's not, you know, the current structure that's quickly evolving is not sustainable by itself because there's no financing. So we need to be getting money from the city. We need to be getting some money from the state, which I think can be doable over time, but I don't know that we have time. On the other hand, these people need our help, and it's far better to be in these situations than sitting in a detention center. For those of you who've ever visited one or known people there, those are crimes against nature as far as I'm concerned. And I think Caitlin's point is we have to consider many people in these agencies, in my opinion, are evil. So we do have to be really, really careful, take care of ourselves, take care of the reputation of the church, and yet still help these people. I don't want us to be just the relief of the pressure on this. And sometimes having the pressure in the government and politicians have to face some of this stuff, I think needs to be done. Then it's kind of all over the place here. And I don't know where to go, but I feel we can't do nothing.
Okay, so it sounds like the city of Dallas and the city of New York have wildly different responses. The city of New York went full on political. Dallas probably does that too to some degree, but Dallas has a long-standing system. I don't know about Boston and Miami, who are probably going to watch this recording later. So if you guys are watching this recording later, that's something to consider is how would your government react to getting these buses? Are they going to know about it? Are they going to be the first people that are going to be informed? And if not, how does the church respond to that? And so that makes me wonder what the relationship is between I didn't ask DHS this in conversations, so I'm glad I'm talking to you guys about it. I don't know how DHS is planning on involving local city governments in these places. I didn't ask if they'd already been to them.
I think it's a good point, especially because of the situation last year. I mean, most folks were looking for a specific destination to go to, right? I think everything we're noticing now is this is all political fireworks, especially with the state of Texas wanting to send folks up to the Northeast for political theater. But what worked so well was we knew where folks wanted to go. And that actually, matter of fact, the city of Dallas with other organizations had already coordinated this. And so it was just getting the funds to purchase bus tickets for folks so they could reunite with family members or friends who are already here in the States, and then just giving them a place to stay for a night or so, right? And so, yeah, I think what you all are dealing with is a little different. And so I'm not sure if that is something, because in my mind, most folks already have some sort of connection or some place where they want to go, right? And it's just, how do we give them the resources to get there where they already have some sort of community support or familial support that'll be there for them.
Also, DHS did clarify that. They said it would all be voluntary movement, that they're not going to be forcing people onto these flights or these buses, that they're going to be sending them where they want to go.
Sure.
But that these hubs will be in these select cities, and then they can, and then if they want to continue on to, say they take a flight to Boston Logan and then they want to take a bus to Springfield, Massachusetts, then someone else needs to pay for the bus to Springfield. Right. So I think that was what they were saying. I think that's what they were saying, is that they are paying for the flights and buses to the transit city. And then from there on out, it's the church's responsibility with whatever partners they use. They were explicit. I'm trying to remember back on these conversations. They were pretty explicit that this would be a nonprofit, non-governmental effort. I don't remember them saying anything about city governments, just that they kept repeating that they trust the nonprofits to be able to do this better than the government can. They said that a couple times. So, which may be true in some ways, but also it shouldn't be fully our responsibility.
I think it has to be a joint effort. I think it's not successful unless the nonprofits are working hand in hand with the local government and local government working hand in hand with the nonprofits. I've seen, every side of this. And at least in Boston too, like New York, Boston also had, Massachusetts has, fully socialized medicine and everything is covered. Anyone who walks in a hospital, is fully covered. So I wonder how they deal with that in Texas, because we do not have that in Texas. Our healthcare here is terrible. And the other thing I was going to underline too is, yes, it's true that they don't release them unless they have a point of contact in the US, unless they're reuniting with someone. But what I've seen happen firsthand in the shelter is that the brother that they were going to go, meet up with changes his mind and says, no, I don't want you to come after all, or I'm sorry, I can't afford for you to stay with me, this cousin or whatever. And then all of a sudden, they're sitting in the shelter left high and dry without a person to go and unite with. So you always have to be prepared that, the person that they're supposed to be connected with, that sometimes that falls through too.
Right. And I think that would be our problem if we did this. It wouldn't be anyone else's problem, it would be ours. Right. So how about this for an action plan based on this conversation, that if the folks that in these highlighted cities want to pursue this idea, which again is just an idea at this point, to go to the city governments and the local nonprofits and say, weird idea, what if we create these respite centers because I said that they might fund it? Do you think that would make us sound ridiculous if we did that, first of all? And second of all, would that be an effective start by communicating with these governmental and nonprofit partnerships in our respective cities? I think everyone that I've contacted has those relationships. I didn't contact any churches that didn't have a history of immigration ministry. So what do you think about that as a starting point to start working with partners and say, this crazy idea was brought to us, what do you think? Or the alternative is we do nothing and we wait for Church World Service to lead the charge and tell all of us what to do. That's another idea.
I mean, I don't think it hurts to get the conversation started with local governments if people have those connections in those offices, and just let them know that, this may be happening, this may be coming. It's not going to sound crazy because we're already seeing it in the news, because it is theatrics right now. But I don't think it'll make anyone sound crazy to say that, like, here, let's be forward thinking in our preparation as a city or as a nonprofit, what this may look like if cities beyond Texas end up being, or beyond California or Arizona, it's not just the Texas border. If other cities end up being respite locations, what will that effort look like? But I'm inclined to think that the infrastructure and everything is there with Church World Service, and it would be really good to like think this out with them and follow their recommendation and lead on it too. I wouldn't go out on a limb as on our own is what I'm saying. Like I would definitely follow the lead of at least one of the 9 national resettlement agencies. Church World Service is one of 9, and I would follow the lead on one of them.
Okay. And then what do you guys think in New York, since you already have an active problem, or I guess not problem, you've already got an active situation going on?
We have an active opportunity, is I think what we're trying to call it. And a lot of people we're working with are very, very positive. And, you know, as I sit here on this call, I'm thinking about other things. I've worked with a group called Freedom for Immigrants. I think we should reach out to some of them to talk about stuff. Okay, I think you've worked with them also. And Bellevue Hospital, which is part of the New York City system, has a thing for trauma victims, and they're working a great deal with immigrants. And I think they could be a group that could help with this for us. And you know, my fantasy with them is, I haven't touched base with them yet, but is maybe we can develop a template of what do you do how do you recognize somebody as a trauma victim, and what do you do to help them? And these are people who could do counseling. I don't know that they could handle, you know, say out of 150 people, I would be willing to bet at least half of them have serious trauma and need help, you know, and how many are going to stay or how many are going to go, that sort of thing. But I think we just need to be talking to everybody on all fronts. And I think it has to grow a little bit organically. I think we talked to Church World Service. I think for us in New York, we also need to talk to Catholic Charities, because that's the address they gave them to go directly to them for help when you arrive in New York. And it's, oh, do you want to go to New York? It's a free trip. They'll give you everything. So we're getting people with no input, no information. And, you know, half the time it's like, you know, somebody said they'll be their sponsor. They can be able to get out of parole and get out of the clutches of ICE and border patrols or border and custom protection. So that's understandable, because taking someone in, I mean, I've done that in the past, and it is overwhelming, and it's often longer than you would ever think it could or would be. I mean, it's a rewarding experience, but it's a lot for somebody to take on. So, you know, I look at our church, we don't have capacity for a respite center. My fantasies are, and the city's talking about, you know, signing contracts the city would sign with hotels to house people, just like we did during COVID. I mean, we can do this if people have the decency and the political will to make it happen. And I think we just have to we have to be very careful in our interactions with the government and with the press. But we've got to start advocating for these people, so we can and show some success with some of this stuff, so we can try to build examples. I don't know of how to make this work, and it can vary from one place to the next. And I have, you know, we're jumping into this kind of blindly, but we can't not.
Yeah, I think also it'd be useful if the contacts in Dallas would share maybe the process that has been successful down there. And we can suggest that to the nonprofits we're working with now. Our particular group, including Craig and Carol, who was on the call yesterday, has worked a lot with Church World Service in Newark with the asylees, the people who've actually been granted asylum after being in detention here. So we're pretty familiar with what they're able to do. And I think a direct reaching out directly to them, again, as a local resettlement agency, would probably give us a lot of leads. And I agree with Greg. This is kind of what I was trying to say before. The idea of these individuals being put in shelters and then being fed into the whole situation of homeless shelters might work for one night, but that's not hardly a solution to what they need. They need to get into social services, to be admitted with caseworkers, for those who are staying. And then my final point is that as I understand it, and Craig can correct me on this, the first busload that was serviced by this particular nonprofit leading group here last Friday was about what, 58, I guess.
54.
And many of them would have gotten off earlier, but the Abbott bus would not allow them to, because it would diminish the shock to the city, I suppose, or rather their political theater. The next bus, and I think there were more that I don't know about, which came on Sunday, started out with, I think, close to 48 or something, 44, and there were only, I believe, 14 who actually arrived. So we need to see what this trend is and what the numbers really represent and how many are specifically coming to New York and will stay. And then the final point about that is as I understand it's not necessarily these are individuals who have a place already, who already have a sponsor and are coming here for that reason, but that many of them are simply put on the bus without knowing what's going on and thinking, as Craig said, that they're going to be taken care of at the end. So for that number, whatever percentage it is, who do have individuals who they would sponsor them, and who do have destinations other than the city or even in the city, it's much easier, obviously, but we need to find out, and we need to have the resources to deal with those who don't have that recourse. So.
Three other things I want to mention is, number one, of course, this has been happening in DC for months. There are people there that are working on it. A couple of them talked to, I'll call it some of the New York groups, about some of the things they're doing. And I think we need to also reach out to them, because they can give us a template of how you deal with what's happening now. And I think we have two different situations here. We have the Governor Abbott human trafficking buses, which is one thing, and hopefully DHS will be at least a little bit more organized. Maybe they'll check to see if they've had COVID. Maybe they can give them their vaccines. Maybe they can get a health history. I mean, they are coming with parole papers, at least theoretically. We have to check to make sure that's happening. But maybe cooperating with DHS, being careful to protect ourselves, the church, and our own reputations. Maybe it'll be a smoother system. I don't know.
I mean, I'm confident that DHS is going to make sure their ducks are in a row with the people that they send, just because it's not in their financial favor to not do that. Governor Abbott doesn't have the same reasoning, but DHS, if they muck up a relationship with community partnerships in these cities, it's not going to do them any favors. So that's sort of my thoughts on what DHS ICE are doing. Another thought that I have about the DHS ICE FEMA partnership. Again, these are people that are familiar to a lot of our leadership. They're not random individuals, so we have a trusted relationship with them. They want me to be their only point of contact from the UCC. However, I'm not the Pope, right? That's not how we work.
Better you than me. That's all right. You couldn't pay me enough to do that.
But I was just thinking, if the way we're going to start doing this is by starting to reach out with this idea to local nonprofits and governments by saying, we would like to deliver goods XYZ if you can offer ABC, right, would be the way to approach that, I would think. Do we name drop DHS so that they know that this is a legitimate request that's been made of us? Because I have those contacts, but I don't know. I mean, what do you guys think? Do you think that would be a necessary piece of that puzzle, or do you think, it sounds like what you've said already is that your local governments and nonprofit partners would just trust you on this and you wouldn't need to do any, so the problem is I don't have an RFP. Like I think all of this would be easily resolved if I had a piece of paperwork that said, this is what we would like to see you do, but I don't have that. So, so what do you guys, you've already sort of answered my question. You don't think it needs to be legitimized to any of your partnerships? Okay.
Well, and you know, you have a different version of DHS and ICE and Border Patrol and FEMA than I do. You know, I've looked at the people on the ground rather than the leadership. I mean, even the leadership, and this may have been the last administration, and sometimes what the leadership is doing and what the people under them are doing are two very different worlds. That whole agency is rogue. They don't respond to congressional inquiries. They've hired people without any screening. They are the largest law enforcement body in the federal government. They're bigger than everybody else combined, than the FBI, then you combine them all, the narcotics people, the tobacco firearms people. They're a machine within themselves. So I think I'm still concerned, as you were, about affiliating with this group. What does that mean? I almost don't want to touch them. But I also don't want to leave these people sitting on the street or in detention.
This is also a concern of our leadership team because yes, ICE is not exactly the most moral compass, is it? But
I tell you, I think it's evil. Sorry.
Yeah, sure.
Well, and it's also they have a history of deception and a history of very uncoordinated efforts. I don't trust them at all to either provide funding or a plan. Like I could totally see them just
dumping people,
throwing this at the nonprofits to handle, for example, and just washing their hands of it as fast as they can. And I don't think they care. My opinion is they don't care much about their reputation, because look what happened with child separation, and they didn't care about that. I don't know. I also just don't trust them.
So it sounds like you guys think we should just plan on them not even being part of the equation, besides sending the buses that they said they're going to send.
I'd love to get money. They can cough up money. They steal money from FEMA, to hire agents. So, if we can get some of that money, that's fine. These are also the people that they did this same stunt when they started saying, we'll release people if your nonprofit will help take care of them. And what they were releasing was the people that were the most expensive to take care of, the people that had multiple sclerosis, the people that had lots of health issues. So anybody that looked like they might be a little bit expensive or had psychological issues. And I can't speak to whether this is true, but it wouldn't surprise me if they knew they had a criminal record. These are the people they would release, and then all these nonprofits were overwhelmed, and they have to say, you have to stop because we can't do this. So,
Okay, so
I think you should still say, I need an RFP. I need to know what you can do for us. What is your commitment?
I asked that in a couple of meetings. They wouldn't give it to me.
Well, then say it makes it really hard for you say my grassroots people have revolted.
We've revolted. Okay, so you're debunking my theory that they wouldn't make a public nuisance out of nonprofits. Good to know. I trust you guys on that. Okay.
I'd love to be wrong. I mean, you could prove me wrong. I have no problem with that. But
Craig, you have a lot more experience with ICE than I do, man. I don't go into their detention centers nearly as often as you do.
It's a scary thing.
It's a scary thing for sure. Yeah.
Well, I've read the reports, but it's nothing like seeing in person for sure.
I've had people get beat up by their guards. I've had people sexually molested by those guards. I've had people come in, they throw them in handcuffs when they still have hearings to do, and ship them on a plane to potentially death in their own country.
Over and over again. It's happened all the time in our years working.
Planes full of people. We've sent planes full of people to their death. So I don't know. It's just
with no publicity. Just they do it. So we're pretty cynical. We're very cynical about working with them. If there is a way to get money, and if it's allocated specifically so that we have that control as nonprofits, I wouldn't turn my nose up at it. But to have a direct affiliation, I think is, going the wrong way.
Okay. Well, FEMA was in that conversation too. It was the two branches coming together to make this request.
They have their thumb over FEMA. They have their thumb over FEMA's budget because they take from it all the time.
I see.
We have no idea of numbers or timeline at all.
They don't.
Nope. I asked for that. He said, we once had a plane full of 135 people come into Boston Logan. He kept repeating that story. I'm like, that happened one time. Well, okay, how often then? No, the answer is no. They didn't give me any sort of numbers.
We have 150 people coming on 3 buses, maybe one tonight or maybe all 3 tomorrow morning, or at least 2 tomorrow morning. We're sitting here looking at emails to see whether we have to run to 40. people.
Okay.
Or
All
maybe
right,
14 in
Irene,
between.
Irene, your point about being burnt out, or rather not being able to sustain what we're going to be doing this week and next week, I mean, it's so key. It's just so key. And without the infrastructure, as we've all talked about, in place, no matter how big our hearts or how much we want to do this, we can't do it. We cannot do it for an unsustained amount of time without funds. So
well, I mean, so I don't have any other churches in New York City besides you guys that are active enough in migration ministries that I would ask this from them. But the reason why I invited Alan onto the call yesterday is Alan from the Disciples of Christ does, right? And that's the value of ecumenical partnerships. So I'm pretty sure Church World Service will be on top of this soon. I got an email from the president of Church World Service saying that they were going to put this together. So if it came from that guy, it's clear that they're taking it seriously. So so hopefully that will be a thing very shortly. Yeah, Craig.
Do you have any churches in DC or in the surrounding area?
I do. So I can connect you with Jerry Foltz in Virginia. He's been active with doing some of the response to this happening in DC, and he is a very informative gentleman. He would be happy. He even said yesterday he'd be happy to tell you everything about what they've done.
Okay.
good.
So yeah, okay. Well, I think this is going to keep happening. So we have to decide what resources we're willing to dedicate for how long. And I think that should be based on what partnerships we have. I think Caitlin's idea about involving the literal people that do this, refugee resettlement agencies. But again, the problem is refugee resettlement doesn't get paid for asylum most of the time. I can't even think of one besides Church World Service that does get that funding, maybe Catholic Charities. What do you have in New York? IRC?
We have the IRC, which is actually based in Elizabeth, but it's also in New York. We have HIAS. I don't think HIAS does anything with asylees. The main one that we've dealt with has been Church World Service and Catholic Charities. Yeah.
And you have LIRS too.
LIRS is basically, LRS has been a little bit elusive. And some other things I've approached them for, but yeah, we can certainly look at.
Yeah, because their lane is mostly with the unaccompanied minors. They really narrow their focus, to the younger ones.
And then in Boston, they already connected with the refugee office on the email thread. So I know Boston has already started a relationship with their partner out there. So that's really good. And if Miami comes into this, I don't know anything about what they're doing down there, but I'm happy to have a separate conversation with them. But yeah, I think this is a good start to a plan. So just start talk. Well, I mean, for New York, it might be that you have to wait until the political stuff dies down in a week or two to be like, yeah. And if there's still buses coming up to be like, okay, so now that you guys are done with the theater, let's put together a plan.
Well, but they're already talking, I mean, they're not liking what we're saying to them, apparently. I've not been involved in these conversations, but we have people, at least they're listening. At least they've already started talking to get some of the hotels they use for COVID to use for these people to stay, which would be a hair better than staying in a detention, in a homeless shelter. Doesn't give us social work. We will have health care. They'll have clinics they can go to after they're out of the hospital. They're out of the hospital. One other thing I keep thinking in the back of my mind and forgetting to bring it forward is these people will also need lawyers and legal advice. So that's another thing that we've got to put into this picture, because one of the things we found is people had hearings scheduled. Sometimes those hearings were taking place while they were on a bus, or they're in a city, in Oklahoma or something crazy, and there's no way they could get to it. So a lot of that stuff has to, wherever they wind up, well, here's their new address. So lots of things are not being done logically. And again, this is an Abbott creation, not a DHS creation, but we need to be aware of those things. And
well, it's sort of a DHS creation. Those are two things they specifically asked me for in the call. They asked me to give them immigration lawyers, which those are hard to come by because to go to law school.
I would say, how much do you want to pay them?
Exactly.
They
asked for free immigration lawyers, and they asked for us to host the migrants in our churches. I said, where's going to be the center? And they're like, how big are your churches? And I said, not big enough for that. The purpose of the church is the sanctuary. It's the worship on Sunday morning. We do other stuff, but that's not the primary purpose, right?
We have we have 2 bedrooms, and it's always a battle to get people in there to stay, and it's not ideal. And we're not big on having people sleep in the pews.
Yeah, well, not
On the other hand, in the respite centers that currently exist, they're literally like, when there's 1,000 people in there, they are body to body on the floor on mats, and they're just scrunched up next to each other. There's no room to walk. And the only thing that makes it somewhat tenable is they do have multiple showers, but they had to build those out. And it was like, when I say multiple, I mean like 6 showers, but it's body to body on the floor on church world service mats. So with blankets, and that's it, like one blanket, one thin mat. And so, you know, I can see how a church could be the shelter. It doesn't have to be that they'll have their own room, but it's a huge undertaking. So I definitely want to learn from what Oak Park is doing, or Oak Lawn. And then, yeah, the other thing about the attorneys I was going to say is those are also nonprofits. All of the immigration attorneys that serve asylum seekers who are undocumented are also nonprofits. And so you have to build out those relationships with those nonprofit legal organizations. And I know several in Texas, and I know a few. NIJC is a big national one, but we'll have to build out those relationships too. It's not like they're just, it's not like any, you know, immigration lawyer is going to take a case that's undocumented.
And there are not enough of them to go around now. And some of the for hire attorneys, even some that you would think would be skilled from big firms, are not as skilled as they need to be to do this job. A lot of times we've had people that were doing pro bono work in really botched up cases. So it's like, you know, people have to be vetted, and sometimes you're only vetting them when you've turned a human being over to them and watched them mess it up, and then you know, oh, I can't use these people. So it's a complex problem. I think we would need to work with the Department of Justice on what's going on with immigration judges, because those vary. You know, if you want to go to an immigration court, you need to come to New York City. You need to go to San Francisco, because that's where your best chances are.
Yeah.
Other places we're getting off topic here a little bit, but those are all factors of what could happen to these people, and we need to consider that. It's like, I'd almost rather house somebody in New York than we were talking about somebody the other day who wanted to go to Louisiana, where you're not going to get asylum. It's just the way it is. So, I mean, what we need is the whole system, but.
Right.
Sorry.
With advocacy, I mean, my opinion of advocacy, and this is my opinion, is that the best way to advocate is to have leverage, right? And if the churches are doing good work for the government that the government needs, we have better leverage to ask the government to change their system. So my hope is that we can advocate once we've got an operation piloted. And I think that operation needs to start with making these partnerships, and then you could request funding through us. There's not very many other channels anywhere for getting funding for asylum, which is why most refugee offices don't do it. Caitlin, do you know any other channels that do grant funding for asylum besides UCC National?
No, I don't. I actually don't. The ones that the resettlement agencies, like when we had our asylum seeker assistance program at Refugee Services of Texas, that program was fully privately funded. It had no grant funds associated with it at all. So the only, even through resettlement agencies that have done asylum work, it's almost all privately funded.
Okay, well, we do. They're not huge grants, but you know, if you need a chunk of change to get started, please reach out to us and apply. Okay, well, it sounds to me like we've got a good plan started. We wait for direction for ecumenical partnerships and whatever other resources Church World Service can get, and start making relationships with our local governments and nonprofit partners. And I also think it's important to note, to be willing to say no where no needs to be said, because it's better to know what you're offering, right, than to say all these things that you wish you could offer and then disappoint hundreds of people that come in and start panicking that they don't have what they thought they were going to get. So that's where I think we should start. Any other final thoughts before we close out today?
Thank you all for your work in New York City. I'm sorry that Texas is the way that
I just remind myself, it's not the people of Texas, and I'll leave it at that.
Right.
That's right. there's good people everywhere, and there's welcoming cities everywhere, and there's welcoming people everywhere. So, and Michael, I'm here for the church in Dallas to, you know, to help coordinate efforts and offer my support however I can, should Cathedral of Hope take on more around this. So I'm here for you guys.
Great. Well, just if you guys don't mind just checking back in with me if you guys start creating any sort of plan or if you need funding, and I will do what I can to make all that happen. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, thanks for putting it together.
Thank you
All
very
right.
much. Thank you
all.
all.
God
Thank you
bless
all.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Irene. Bye-bye.